My mind has been obsessed with mind control, as it tends to be. Totally not a psychopathic kind of interest. But you know, here we are. So mind control is it's one of those things actually, like I remember like cartoons as a kid, like probably like my first exposure to mind control is that someone goes woo, 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 you know, and it sends out rings, you know, like
I know exactly what
sonar,
you're talking about.
and then like it's coming out from their forehead, which for some reason is associated with sound. There's a throat chakra, but sending it out from their forehead to, I guess, cause the brain is in the head, and that is what we think of when we think of minds. We think of the brain, which is not entirely the same. In fact, it's been a problem when it comes to the problem of consciousness in philosophy of mind. Is the mind the brain? And I say no. Some people say consciousness itself is the epiphenomena of cognitive processes, biological processes happening in the brain. It is an illusion, not a real thing. That you are being deceived when you think you exist as a self. Descartes would disagree with that. He would say, actually, if I'm being deceived, that presupposes my existence as a self, as a thing that thinks of itself as a thing, regardless of whether that thing has a body or a brain or is the brain. So mind control, it's actually quite a big spectrum. I didn't think about this, but now I did. You've got one end of it. You've got.
Are you sure? Or did someone else tell you to think about that?
Coming back to that. We'll come back to that. At one extreme, you've got subtle advertisements or not subtle advertisements, you know, like jingles, you know, like the Tootsie Roll song that people after us probably won't know. We just probably know it because of the throwback commercial they're still showing. Singing about the great things about Tootsie Rolls or Oscar Mayer. You know, so it's these things. These are kind of overt attempts to influence, right? So that's like not mind control per se, but you know, go to the Rolling Stones line. He can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. The idea of concepts that get built into products, and are we buying the sizzle or are we buying the steak? And also, does the thing provide those invisible things it was aiming to provide? So there's a little preview of this very meandering topic. At the other extreme, you've got full-blown demonic possession. That is also mind control. So which ones we're going to talk about in any given mind control discussion is probably going to have to be bracketed to some extent. I think we should leave the demonic possession to an entirely different discussion.
Yeah. I think that definitely warrants
Yeah.
carving that out for a whole different thing. Because I mean, you know, that's something like that. And exorcism could be certainly a different thing you could talk about.
Because while we can debate whether a self exists, right? I'll let Dan Dennett take the skeptic part on that. But whether we can debate that, you know, we're still talking about things. We don't have to bring in entities like demons and things, which are their own problematic thing when it comes to how do you define them, do they exist, etc. And that's its own. We can spend so much time having that fun conversation. So,
And I think we will at a later date.
look for the whatever. Look for the notice. You've been notified. So the big bad when it comes to mind control, when people are talking about mind control now, they're not usually talking about subtle or overt advertisements, rather, and they're not talking about demons usually. There are aliens at the demon end of that. There's alien mind control, but that comes closer to what most people think of, which is either it goes from the realm of hypnosis and mind control, so someone with like a mind control power of some kind, to mind control technology. So these are types of mind control that have human actors that do not necessarily bring in supernatural powers. So we'll go past like, could you be telepathically controlling someone's mind? Again, that's kind of, it's a hop on the other side of the weird fence, another level of weird territory, because then we have to talk about telepathy and things like that. But we don't have to do that yet. We can just talk about technologies and propaganda and hypnosis and have plenty to get lost in, which we probably will. So let me shut up for a minute, a novel concept, and ask you all, what do you think about mind control? What are your thoughts when you come to think about mind control? And what was your first concepts of it as a younger creature than you are now?
So I'll jump in. Similar to what you were saying with that's kind of what I remember too. And the spinning black and white circle, the spiral.
Yeah, the
hypnotic
swirl. Yeah,
swirl.
that is key. If you need to influence anyone, you need one of those. I need to put one of those in my office, but I have an interesting story that does not involve...
Wait, are you gonna watch the hypnotical yourself? You're just like you're like, I really don't feel like being here right now.
People will walk in, they're like, oh, he looks busy, and they'll walk out. They'll try to ask me questions, I won't answer, I'll just be so focused. But this is interesting. So this is not a mind control story per se, but it is tangentially related, I feel like. So, as you guys know, we talked about this before because we are all, close friends. Back in June, I had a colonoscopy done. And for that, they put you under twilight anesthesia, they call it. And this is the first time I was in any kind of anesthesia aside from when I had my wisdom teeth taken out when I was a kid. So I don't know what to expect with this. Everything I read about it, it's like you're still conscious, you can still move around and all this stuff. That's what they say. This was my experience with the anesthesia, and then I'm going to tell you what I heard from other people. So my experience was this. They give me the IV, they take me in the room, they have me lie on my side, and they're talking to me, and that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember is I don't see anything, but I hear the nurse say my name. In an instant, I am there. I am seeing. I am in the recovery room. I see. Lauren is there with me. I see the nurse over there who just said my name. I'm sitting like in the hospital bed thing, but I'm sitting upright. So that's what I remember. Okay. Now, what I found out afterwards, the nurse told Lauren that while I was in the procedure room, I'm talking about like how weird the anesthesia is, how weird it feels. Like, it's just very weird. And I'm laughing. I'm all kinds of giddy. The procedure ends. They take me back to the recovery room. They bring in Lauren. I'm there. I'm talking to Lauren about things. I'm talking to the nurse about things. But like, for me, from my perspective, it's like, no memory of that. It was like one moment I am like in the procedure room, like eyes open, I can start to feel it. And the next minute I'm like in an instant. So it's interesting that it wasn't, obviously not mind control by any stretch, but it's like, but they were telling me that I could do things and I was complying, but I have no memory of it. And I guess similarly, you could think about like, I forget what it's called, but like you slip a pill or whatever in someone's drink and they like lose their memory, their inhibitions. It's very interesting, like that side of things, the medicinal or the medical side.
Yeah,
so
I think it's a...
Well, I mean, it also sounds a little bit like being drunk, like to some degree, like you kind of just like, just in general, that has a, that kind of vague,
Right. Like, was it a memory consolidation thing that you didn't consolidate those memories in the same way? Or was it, and then also you didn't like, but then like you're in the recovery room. So like at some point, did you stop being chatty? Like you it wasn't just like, oh yeah, it's just the weirdest thing. Dan, huh? Like it wasn't like that,
And I actually, it's funny you mentioned that.
Was it gradual and then back up, Yeah.
That's the way it felt. But when I asked Lauren about it, I was like, was there any moment that you could tell that all of a sudden I was lucid, that I was, quote unquote, there? And she was like, no, it did not. I did not get that impression at all.
Weird.
Yeah.
Weird. No, that fascinates me as somebody obsessed with the mind. Because look, when you talk about mind control, you have to answer, as a philosopher, you have to do this kind of thing, right? You have to define your terms, because otherwise people get really wiggly, particularly when they don't want to lose the argument. They just say, whoa, what I really meant by, mind. What the heck is the mind? So The mind is what we think of as the experiential part of what's happening with the brain. It's like you could say it's the software if the brain is the hardware, but a lot of times people use the term interchangeably because the mental experience is so closely correlated as far as they're concerned with the condition of the brain, the organ. And there are reasons to understand that they just think of them as one and the same. However, I'll have to reel this back. I'm wearing a leash when I do this. A near-death experience that occurs away from the physical body, away from the so-called organs of perception, or when cognitive activity, what would I say, is not detectable, and still there is this experience of what I'll call mind. There's this sense of being, of existing in time, to some extent, and so this kind of idea of like, well, that's the mind, and yet in your experience, you didn't really have the experience of that happening. So the talking thing that was having cognitive experiences, but you don't have a sense of that happening. So there's the thing of like, was it you, or was it mind, and what do we think of as the mind? So the scary experience of mind control, bring it back now to that, is the idea probably that you're there aware of what's going on, but you can't do anything about it. So it's really more like body control. It's more like that. It's more like, oh, well, I'm in my head and they're telling me to shoot somebody, or whatever. And I'm in my head saying, no, not doing it. But here goes the thing, doing the thing. Right? So that's like the mind control of the cartoon level mind control, right? Or where all of a sudden you're just totally convinced that you're one of the bad guys too, because of course there are bad guys in those cartoons.
Would it be like that though? As I always think, like the different levels would be like something like you're talking about, like your kind of first interpretation of that. Like the thing that always stands out to me, because this would be my first thing, is like the Jedi mind trick, right? Like just being able to be like, hey, like, don't worry about this, and everyone's like, oh yeah, you don't need to see any identification, yeah. But in a weird sense, that kind of thing, like, is like, it's like suggestion, but it's also like, in a weird sense, it's like, yes, you're changing the path, but in another sense, you're also sort of giving the person like what they want, right? Like, so like in that like idea like that, in that kind of suggestion, because it's like, I don't know, do I really care that much about this? I'm just here doing right, like am I that like because you wouldn't be able to like, it's almost like you're being like, yeah, like you don't need, this is fine, like this is, you just, and it's like, it's not so much like, I know like in Star Wars you'll say, oh, it's like a thing to work on like weak minds or something like that, but it's like, but it probably is less like weak, but it's more just like, well, yeah, those guys probably didn't really care that much, this is just their job, they don't, they're getting paid either way, whatever.
Yeah,
they don't have that much dedication to you. So like you can like, so
the soldiers working the beat.
Yeah, I always think about that kind of like that as like a weird like variation of mind control, but in another sense, it is kind of like, it's just like, it's like suggestion or like telling people what they want to hear. And then like the one that you had said about like, oh no, you can't control myself, like I'm doing this thing or whatever. There's like, I think it's more like, what about like this? It's more like a split personality thing. Like it's like that kind of like, like you you don't remember this thing because like your other, you like something else took over or something. It's like, or you're like, or you're doing things that seem normal to you, but you don't realize that this has been something that's been in play. Like, you decide you do want to do this thing.
Yeah.
It's not so much like, oh, I can't control myself and I'm thinking this. It's more like, oh no, I think it would be a good idea to go like, commit this crime or do this, whatever it is, because it's like you feel like that, you feel compelled to do it, not so much like, and I always think of it more like that way as opposed to like the puppet master version of it,
Yeah. And so it raises interesting questions though. So what's the difference then between influence and control? Okay, so like we can talk about the people becoming radical eyes.
Radical, man.
Yeah, like
And
the Ninja Turtles.
they get a skateboard and they eat pizza. Yeah.
Which is actually one of the things I think of when I think of mind control. I think of rutabagas, rutabagas, rutabagas. You command, I obey. Vernon, Dan, every time someone says rutabagas, Dan just kind of goes,
every time. Well, sometimes I do this. I go like this,
So
that'll take you back.
If you become influenced to do things that were way out of character for who you used to be, for those listening, not just listening, I'm doing air quotes, that thing they tell you not to do. All right, so who you used to be, who you allegedly used to be, and now you are this really extreme version of that person. Is it mind control? Like, when does it start becoming mind control? And where does the line between mind control and influence exist? So I will go to we'll go to probably where most of us come from, this idea of brainwashing. Brainwashing was a term that entered the public consciousness in the late 20th century. I believe it was after the Korean War, and certain types of processes that American soldiers were subjected to influence their belief structures. And so they might be things like you're in this camp and you don't get that much in the way of rations or cigarettes or things like that, but you get some things. And if you write an essay on the good things about communism, you get a pack of cigarettes. The winner gets a pack of cigarettes. But then they also read the essay over the loudspeakers in the camp. Oh, so now they're activating what you would call cognitive dissonance, that you feel this need to be consistent with that thing that you've proclaimed. And this is a real psychological phenomena that's relatively well understood now, or at least relatively well exploited. And so you've got cognitive dissonance. But they didn't do it for like a ton of money or to go free. So they can't be like, well, I only did that to go free, because it's like, it's such a paltry reward. You can't say the reward was really the thing that influenced you to do it. So you start to think of yourself in a different way. That's what cognitive dissonance does. It gets you to change the way you think about yourself, to further comply with your demonstrated behavior. And that ties into things like social proof and things like that. Now, a lot of these things that I'm talking about now that are brainwashing techniques, right? We just call them advertising now. And if you read Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, it's all spelled right out. And we see it all the time in internet stuff. Most people don't know that this BS thing I'm about to say, as if it's fact, is a fact, because it's not a fact. But they just put out this thing, and most people don't know. First of all, you'd have no way of knowing whether most people know it. And it's a social proof thing. It's a fear of missing out thing. You though, can get this inside, you don't want to miss this. You'll be ahead of the pack. You'll be cooler than the rest of them if you know this latest junk about some pink salt nonsense being purported to make you lose 20 pounds. And like, this stuff is out there. And they prey on things like scarcity, or this seemingly wired in idea of reciprocity. Well, I gave you something. I kind of expect, I gave you something. you kind of expect that you should give me something back. And that's probably wired in on an evolutionary level. That actually, like, people that didn't cooperate enough with the tribe probably had problems furthering their genetic line on. To the extent that any of that stuff is genetic, and we can and will have more conversations about that in other conversations. But is it brainwashing?
Just jump back to the thing with the cognitive dissonance thing. I mean, some of that, it's like hard to be. What if that is like verifiable things, and what if that is just like, we're afraid of killer communists. They're gonna come to get us. And look, they can also brainwash people. So when people believe things, they don't believe them because they believe them. They believe them because they've been manipulated into believing them. And like maybe that might be true, but then you're also talking like sort of in like the realm of like the captor thing. Isn't that like the kind of like Stockholm syndrome kind of idea? Like, you know, you start to identify with your captor,
well,
and that's not really brainwashing. It's basically just like you've been psychologically broken to such a degree that the only, you know, thing you have is being the only social interaction you have is being held by this captor who controls all of your stuff. So you start to agree with them.
Yeah, and what I'm saying though is that really different than brainwashing? You know, like, so we call it, okay, Stockholm syndrome, you know, but then we have the situation of Patty Hearst. Now, Patty Hearst was the daughter of a wealthy, she was like the heiress of a publishing company.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so she was kidnapped by members of the, I didn't actually read the name of this army before. Symbionese Liberation Army. I'll just call it the SLA. I should have actually pronounced that before. I read it and I was like, oh, okay, she's Liberation Army. She's kidnapped by these people, kept in a closet, tortured in various ways, including probably what you could imagine. I won't say it to avoid all the money we're making. I don't want to get too monetized. All kinds of trauma she was subjected to, and winds up joining this group, participating in like robberies and things like that, like armed robberies. She's still in jail. Was it her free choice? Now, she was a left-leaning kind of person, you know, so once you can get away, you know, like, she thought of it as being choices she was making, even though, was it?
Let me interrupt you for a second. Yeah. So is this post World War II?
This was,
well, I guess she's still in jail, probably.
Yeah.
70. Okay, so I wonder if
74.
I'm trying to remember when the Nuremberg trials happened, but I wonder if, you know, that it basically set the precedence, because that was all about, you know, the officers claimed, you know, just following orders, and what came out of that was like, no, you're still accountable, essentially. Like, what you did, you know, is still wrong. You're going to be punished for that. So they
were actually pretty well. They're pretty shortly after World War II. We're looking at
they're like right after.
But yeah, I mean, you've got, and I don't know at what point. So yeah, there's this idea. Okay, so the idea of free will, the idea of you being responsible for the behaviors of your body, is sort of baked into our legal system. Because if other people could control you, would you really be responsible for it? And so if you were not in control, you have to provide some kind of defense for why you weren't in control. I was insane. Well, you probably wouldn't say that. Your lawyer would say that. But, you know, I
am insane.
Your Honor.
I was
insane.
I think we're all a little insane. I mean, gotta be somewhere.
It's a sliding scale.
Again, it's a different thing with, you know, advertising at one end, demonic possession at the, yeah. So,
demonic advertising at one end.
Is there any other kind? Yeah. Maybe it's not a spectrum so much as it's just a circle. But yeah, so
it's a large Ouroboros golden arches situation.
So back into mind control. Can you be made to do things? Okay, so there's the idea: can you be made to do things against your will? Can you be covertly programmed to be a different person that the current you doesn't want to be without your consent? And that seems to be, I mean, that's the thing about it being control, right? That it's without your consent, that this thing was done to you. And so what I'm going to suggest is that actually there's a ton of gray, as we've already illustrated. Like there's a ton of gray because, okay, so the Jedi mind trick that we were talking about. Okay, so why am I still wearing these things? Hold on for a second. These are my mind control beads. I meant to. You
They'll say we need the intermission
I-
music from Monty Python: The Holy Grail.
Or the technical difficulties, please stand by.
we can do that. All right, it's analog technology problems. The Jedi mind trick, and neurolinguistic programming, and covert influence. Now, in a previous conversation, was it the one on the arcade game on
Palbus.
Yes, in that we talked about different mind control technologies and things like that, and the idea of neurolinguistic programming and covert hypnosis and things like that, and the idea of the thing called the frequency following response. So we're going to get into the technologies a little bit. The frequency following response and entrainment. So entrainment is when basically your brain reacts in rhythm with external stimuli and kind of syncs up with them. So there's the idea of like brainwave entrainment, for instance. And it largely has to do with rhythm. Although we'll get into the frequency following response. The idea is that when that stuff gets synced up, you can then change the thing that it's synced up to change, in this case, the brain. You can change, say, you can, a brain can become entrained, there's brainwave entrainment. And then your brain syncs up to a certain type of pulsing and things that are out there. And then if you change that stimulus, you change the behavior of the brain because it's linked up. In hypnosis, we call that pacing and leading. And Milton Erickson would do that. I was talking about the idea of the moving the finger at the same tempo as the person's breathing, and then changing the tempo of the finger to influence the behavior of the breathing, to relax the person and create what we'll call in this case a more suggestible state. That's a more problematic phrase than you might initially think, because we think, well, sometimes we're more suggestible than others, but actually it turns out we're actually pretty suggestible all the time. And there are certain things that can sort of act as meta suggestions to make us the suggestion that you're more suggestible might then give you the experience of seeming like you're more suggestible than you were. So one thing, when I'm out promoting hypnosis, some people think that looking you in the eye, if you're a hypnotist, if they look you in the eye, they can hypnotize you. I wish. I just sell cars. I just but
Really crappy cars.
yeah.
Like...
really just overrated cars. Overbar. Yeah, so but yeah, so that kind of idea. But if they believe that, then actually that becomes kind of true. Because they back up and they're like, don't look me in the eyes. I don't want to be hypnotized. And I can say something like, well, how do you know how hypnotized you already are? You know, and it's kind of like, no, I just did a little language trick. Now, that in and of itself isn't going to hypnotize somebody just like that. But if they're already convinced that they're under your influence, then you say something that's a sneaky language trick to kind of edge it along. The imagination can take you very far into being what we'll call mind controlled.
Let's just reel it back for a second,
Yeah.
because there's like something you're just talking about, like, just the idea, like, oh, well, you can be influenced, and like, we're always very suggestible, like this thing. There's often like chants that people do at events or rallies and stuff like that often have a meter that's usually like 3 beats, and those seem to be the most successful ones that people remember. Or even like towns, when they have like a thing, it'll be like, you know, shop, like whatever, you know, do this, you know, eat, pray, love, like these things, like, you know,
Right.
they always have like
Yeah.
a meter of three. It's like doom, doom, doom. Like it has to have three. It's not necessarily three syllables, but the beats need to be right there. So you can easily say dun da da da, you know, like or dot dot dot, you know,
Yeah.
like, and it's like, or like, you know, when you have we'll say like certain types of like riots or mass hysteria things where people are in groups and, you know, somebody, maybe there's like an organizer or something like that that's a thing that riles people up, and otherwise non-violent people go out and then start committing violence. Or is that influence? Is that like a, I'm not saying it's mind control, but like the behaviors they're engaging in are typically out of the norms when those things happen, you know. I guess
Yeah.
similar to like how when we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the Stanford prison experiment, like people
Yeah.
really acting completely against their behavior given giving the like environmental setting. It's like, and like the influence it's causing. I don't know. Just it's like I was just wondering if like, do you think is that like, because that's not technology, that's just like, you know, but it's like,
Yeah.
but then again, it's like it's out of your, it's not even part of your identity. Like you're not a person who does these things, and then all of a sudden you are now a person who's doing these things.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you're kind of like, you know, so it's like, it's very like, is that like a, it's like it's sort of like, I guess that would kind of fall under like an almost hypnotic, you know,
I mean,
suggestion
kind of,
thing.
right? Because there's like this, like there's like a group think kind of thing that happens, and it's not just the echo chamber thing, which is another kind of group think, but there's this emergence factor of like, you know, birds don't usually crash into each other if they're healthy when they're flying together. I have a predator might crash into a prey bird, but that's intended. But if there's a flock of birds flying and they're all moving in the same way and they're all, none of them are bumping into each other. We don't seem to do that well with cars, but
Well
fleets
enough. I
of
mean,
taxis
considering we
do
just
though.
have lines,
Yeah.
painted lines that
So
would protect you.
So what turns out, at least the explanation for that is it's this phenomena called emergence, and basically there are a couple little rules that the group follows, and as long as they follow those little rules, it organizes everything else. So the group becomes self-organizing in that regard.
Hmm.
And so there could be an emergence factor going on with mass riots and hysteria and things like that. It could also be, I mentioned this like way back when we talked about liminal spaces and how like when other people aren't around or you gotta like what holds reality together, and is it our rules? And so like when all the rules are suspended, it's like reality itself kind of shifts and becomes malleable. And I'll just mention something we all probably wish we could forget about just 5 years ago. I won't mention it by name, but something happened in 2020, and the whole social order got shut down. And then when it got rebooted, it was rebooted differently. We'll say it was rebooted differently. It I'm not gonna say like it didn't come back on right because who knows if it was right before, but like it didn't boot up the same, and like and it's almost like different people have different boots, and the whole convenient fiction of the social story fell apart and it never got rebooted as the same thing again. So like we all live in these like little different worlds, but that also means that if I live in a world where certain things are assumed to be true, my behavior parameters change remarkably. Because if, all right, I will. If everybody's a lizard person that's in control and they really are doing all these things, like what isn't justified in your behavior? Like because the whole thing,
Well, now you're talking about less about mind control, more about like almost like like sort of like a
but it's
schizophrenia
on the
type.
other
No,
side of mass hysteria,
yeah, yeah.
and it's on the other side. Mass hysteria is just on the other side of mass programming.
Okay,
And
well,
that's just
maybe
on the
this
other
is
side
like
of propaganda.
this sort of feels like low level mind control to me. But when there's like, you know, when there's like a buzzword that like starts making its way into the zeitgeist and then it starts repeating itself over and over, and it's particularly on when it's also usually constructed within the framework of like news, you know, whether that's, you know,
Yeah.
online journalism, television news, but and I always find it really odd when I then start hearing my parents say this word that's like, this is not something that would be in your vocabulary, and it's just weird. And like, or like you'll see people will, like, for comedy sakes, will do like the super cuts of the different people saying like something that's really bizarre, and then it just becomes a thing, and it's just like, and it's like, oh, so it's either does one person just figure out how to, like, basically, this is a great thing, it'll play well with, like, and be picked up and it'll worm its way through, or is it just like a phenomenon that happens? Because if it's the first one, then that kind of is sort of mind control, like in a very low level way. It's not just advertisement, because it's not just like one person selling one product. It kind of works its way, and then the culture starts, mind controlling.
I'll weigh in on this.
Yeah.
Okay, so in my daily role, and I don't want to get into specifics, but in my daily role, things with PR and marketing are very specific, and they're thought out, they're very intentional about what is said and what is not said. And I believe, based on my experience, that those types of things that you're seeing, it's like an attempt to cut through the noise and gain traction. And sometimes it works and we see like the mass pickup, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's all very deliberate, all very well crafted and well thought out before it's actually released to the public.
Well, and when you think about language, man, see, there's so much to unpack with this, because when you think about language, when I say something's hard, this is a hard thing to do, that's a metaphor. It's not. Hard is a physical kinesthetic experience. If I say something's difficult to grasp, that's a metaphor. How do you grasp something that isn't tangible? Like, how do you literally grasp something that is an idea? It's a metaphor. And so some people think, everybody will debate everything. Some people think that the world out there, we're moving around in this world. We made noises to describe things out there in this physical world, because we're evolving, and eventually these things become codified, that we have words: rock, tree, tiger. Don't know why those three. Those are the ones. There's your 3 beats. So we start this thing, okay? But then we start talking about experiences that we're having in our heads, and we start to use the same words. Now we're going back to Robert Cialdini again, influence and the psychology of persuasion. If I'm drinking a warm beverage, you are going to perceive me, most likely, okay, there are always statistical anomalies, most likely you're going to perceive me as a warmer person. If I ask you to review something and it's on heavy paper, you're going to give it heavier weight in substance. The metaphors carry over. And so there are certain words that we hear that produce a certain state in us, a feeling, an emotional state. And we can use those words, not us, because we're ethical and kind, but we can use, those words can be used. Subscribe now.
Hold that mug up real quick with the warm beverage.
As you focus on the warm feeling spreading throughout you now, I wonder if you might just go ahead and click that subscribe button.
Yeah, I was thinking though,
the
let's jump back into like the weird stuff though. Like, let's say
let's do it.
So what about like we've talked about like the things you can do in dreams, cultural, context, and also specific language, because like, I mean, like something like you're saying, like, okay, grasp a concept, and it's like, well, okay, like you understand those words, you know what they mean. Like if you didn't really, if that's not, someone else might use a whole different, it's just like if you're speaking in a different language and this doesn't have cultural meaning to you, it's like it might not have the same kind of vibe. So it's like kind of almost feel like, I guess it's like universal in a sense, but it can't be like universally applicable. Like weird terms, like they said, like make it into the zeitgeist in like, either the United States or like primarily English-speaking countries or Western countries, it's like that might not have the same impact in somewhere else, like in like Japan or something like that. They might be like, this means nothing to me. It's like this like when it gets translated in doesn't make sense. I mean, we've all had. I think Chris, you and I have had that experience in in anime. You're watching something and it's like, well, I don't really understand like what that means because it has some kind of particular cultural context, and it's like funny, and it's like, but I don't get it. Like, it's it's just.
But it's interesting though. Other things do carry over across different cultures. So, for instance, we were on vacation just a few weeks ago, and the floor 13 was non-existent in our hotel. Okay, now I want to say China. I could be wrong. They have the same superstition around the number 4 because the word for 4 is very similar to the word death or dead or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and I can't say for sure because I've never been there, but they practice a very similar thing where like floor 4 is missing from the elevators.
Interesting. I didn't. It's in Japan. It's the word shin. Is 4. There are actually, I believe there are two different numbers for the.
Okay.
I think there are two different words for the number 4 in Japanese, but shin is one of them, and that's the word for death. Yeah, as in Shinigami, or death gods or reapers. Yeah.
I don't know if it's from MK Ultra or something that was in like, what was it, Project like Stargate or something like that, where they actually thought like you might not, it's not just remote viewing, but like you could like invade someone's dream and implant an idea there, so that it's it's even more subconscious. So it's like, I have this, and if you do it repeatedly, it's like that. That's like, now that's definitely
a little more in the
spooky
direction of the Stargate type stuff, which for those listening was a essentially the U.S. government did a bunch of research on psychic warfare and.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. Has this been declassified or is this alleged?
Actually, a lot of it's declassified.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
Probably the part that happened after it was quote unquote defunded. That part's probably alleged. It went somewhere else with a different name. Doesn't exist anymore. But this is good stuff. Yeah. I mean, both MK Ultra and the Stargate stuff, which has nothing
to do with like Egyptian pyramids and
movies, or the series or whatever.
I love.
Unless we want to get into all the weird David Lynch stuff and Twin Peaks and the guy that's the current. Anyway, we'll do stuff later. That was probably separate, but there was this big psychic warfare, psychic espionage thing, remote viewing stuff that was done, which we will have to talk about at some point, but it's like that's its own wide-ranging, because all these things spread out. Like we didn't even talk about MK Ultra, but that's usually where people start with this. and it's, we didn't talk about. So I mean, you've got the idea of the Manchurian Candidate, and can you sufficiently create a separate personality in a person such that you can train them to be an assassin for political purposes and then have them completely forget about it, but that they just don't know that all that other stuff existed. And you can see from a shady government perspective why something like that might be useful. So there's a guy named George Estabrooks who was a big participant in the MK Ultra project, which was not like one thing, it was lots of little project kind of grouped up.
Was it like also like dosing people with LSD and seeing what happens?
Yeah, it was subjecting people to horrible traumas. See earlier note on Patty Campbell Hearst. And the traumas, and can you use trauma to make someone more suggestible / programmable? Yes, you can. Okay? Yes. People will do, but because it's how cults work. It's one of the ways cults work, because there's a lot of stuff going on there. Cult programming. All right, so the idea, I got to just close a couple loops that haven't technically been opened. You are not more suggestible if you're less intelligent. In fact, hypnosis, when people go into hypnosis, oftentimes people with higher IQs, higher intelligence as we measure it, are actually very good hypnotic subjects because it's generally speaking, it's not something that happens to you. It's a skill you develop and you participate with the hypnotist.
So if you identify as being unable to be hypnotized, what does that say about you?
Yes, right, right. You can say I refuse. Well, good, yeah, and you'll probably succeed, unless it's one of these other forms. Okay, now we've talked about some
Well,
things.
nobody listening to this is not suggestible hypnosis. Everybody listening to this is very smart.
Very intelligent and very
We're definitely not.
they're here. They found the right place. We're here together as that oxytocin spreads through your body. That feeling of togetherness that we have. But actually, this is actually the tangent I was about to go on, which is directly related to this, and it actually ties back to the video game thing. If you can use technology to create a neurochemical state in a person, and you can frame the narrative such that it is logical to proceed in such a way because you've been given good reasons. People love being given reasons to do things. It's the magic because that we can talk about very briefly in a second. It's actually pretty easy to influence people. It's not always easy to influence. It's not always easy to get them into the state you want because first impressions matter. And there are people that are going to see me that will run for the hills immediately. And there are people that will see me that because of markers that I have are going to say, that guy's a person like me. That idea, that is a person like me. This sense of rapport that we get with another person is a really big matter of influence. There's this idea of people that are similar to me, they're like me, and I have it right. And they do too. Although a lot of people have this idea that they're kind of faking it and they feel like everybody else kind of has a clue and they don't have a clue. When the truth is, everybody's faking it.
So like
all this stuff is made up.
Syndrome. Yeah. Everything being made up now that gets into a whole different.
It depends what you mean by made up. But yeah, so but if you, because we're getting into the technology end of it, and can you control people's minds with technology? Because the answer is kind of, okay? Because if you can get entrainment, if you can get people using certain means, if you can get them to be entrained to your technology, if you can produce emotional states in them with technological means or using tried and true methods, like talking in a certain tone is going to produce a certain state. Because if I start talking in an excited, angry manner, you're more likely to go there. And that's kind of the same thing. It ties in with mirror neurons. If I am watching a sport, which I wouldn't be, but if I were watching a sport, which I played, which is the reason I would, let's say I'm watching football and I played football, I'm going to have a greater experience of enjoying that and being engaged in it because I have what's called mirror neurons, which basically means I look at those people having that experience on the field, and because I've had that experience, I have a greater degree to hallucinate that for myself in the present and therefore be engaged in that experience. Well, that's something that's a natural human capacity. So and this is something that hypnotists will utilize too, that I will, I'll pace and lead different things, and then I'll go into hypnosis while I'm talking to the person. And there's a natural capacity to follow into what we call hypnosis, this so-called suggestible state. But if I can do that, okay, like maybe we couldn't do it with a video game before, but what about a virtual reality video game? What about a video game that measures your galvanic skin response and your sweat, and it knows how engaged you are, and it can react to it and reinforce you? So you're talking about like, we have really, really sophisticated technology on the edge of being fully out there.
We're talking about hypnosis, and like, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong about this, but like, the hypnosis is largely a cooperative and voluntary thing.
Yeah.
Like most people want to be hypnotized for whatever, like they want to like change something about themselves or improve something or solve a problem, whatever that is. Like at least from a therapeutic standpoint. As far as like mind control stuff, I feel like the question always comes down to is like the people that want this. What is their, are they like that afraid of society? It's it's like what happened to them.
Right,
They're trying to do, because as far as like like building a Manchurian Candidate or something like that, that just is just like it's like a fear thing, right? It's just like a fear, because like I'm sure any government could probably find some person who would just do the thing that they want them to do because they want to do that. You don't need to make a secret person. You'll find you. I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find a volunteer that meets your criteria. Like without a lot of extra stuff. Like as far as like sneaking in and getting other people's secret information through like. Like remote viewing or something like that. I feel like that's a whole
like sharks with lasers on their nose.
It's like an over-engineering a problem that's really not that hard to do.
Yeah.
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 Throw enough greenbacks at it, it'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Actually, a lot of this stuff is a lot easier to solve than all this high technology would really require. And the thing is, so when it comes to hypnosis and like kind of one of the interesting takeaways when it comes to being influenced is this notion of the yes set. And salespeople will know this as if you get somebody to say yes 3 times, then you can get them to buy your product.
3 times again.
It's that 3 times again, which seems to just be a thing for people. Like the magic number 3 seems to kind of be a thing. I think it's like there's 1, there's 2, it happened again, 3. Pattern. Okay, pattern.
Well, that's how we form data.
More than that,
like data is a set of 3, right? Before it's
yeah.
It's a
and so there's this idea. One of my hypnosis teachers said it like this: compliance precedes suggestibility. And what that means, in the way he meant it, is that if you can get somebody to do things for you, to comply with your requests or commands, they tend to continue doing it. It's a yes set. You get them going in a given pattern, they tend to continue in that pattern. And so, if I were trying to covertly influence you, I'm going to do it in a somewhat obvious manner now, but if I were trying to covertly influence you, I'd want to get you to comply with something I'm doing. But I'm not going to be like, place your hands out in front of you and lock your fingers down and interlace them because I'm clearly doing something there, But I can be like, now just wait a minute, just stop. All right, listen. Take a breath and freaking listen to what I have to say. All right, now consider this. Well, what was that? I told you to stop. I told you to listen. I told you to take a breath. I told you to consider this. And you kind of have to do those things in order to be cooperating with the conversation. Now, I've got some kind of angry tone. Like, what's my problem as the guy that's saying all this? Like, but you see okay, so you'll see this in advertisement all the time. Imagine being on a beach. What? That's your first step. You imagine being on a beach. Imagine how good it would feel to have virtual assistants making money for you while you earn money while you sleep or whatever. Like this kind of thing. Like it's, imagine this, feel that, think about this, do that. So, listeners, pay attention. As you're out there in the world, pay attention when people are trying to get you to comply. Just be aware of it, because awareness sort of breaks it a little bit. It puts you back at choice. It takes you out of inertia and somewhat back at choice. And I think that is where what we think of as mind control. If you can get the chemicals going in a person's body and you can get the story in their head, and you can get enough buy-in by using tricks that are somewhat hardwired in the human neurology, you can achieve something like mind control. But it's definitely not that boop, 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 boop thing. However, there is technology that exists, probably can't do what people claim it can do, called voice to skull technology. And using something called the Frey effect, Frey, for anyone that wants to do their own research. The Frey effect is basically where you can use microwaves, which are like radio waves. We think of them as being things that cook things, but they do, but you know, they're like radio waves. You can send information on them. And so the Frey effect can be used to directly cause sounds to occur inside of the human skull. That is basically, it's causing parts of the brain to vibrate rapidly to, this sounds terrible, to these microwaves being beamed into them in a way that produces sound in the ear, but seems to be coming from inside the head. And people outside of those people can't hear those sounds. So they think they're having these voices talking in their head. That's the idea, okay? Now, in all likelihood, to be able to produce the amount of energy needed to do it, you'd actually need a fairly large device to do this, to be able to do it intelligibly. And then, so what? They've got voices in their head. I have stupid voices in my head. I've got one particular one I'd love to completely remove from my head forever. This is 2025, people. 3 guesses. Put it in the comments what that voice is. So those voices aren't going to make you do things, but when you take into consideration things like gaslighting and things like that, and getting people to think they're going crazy or putting weird ideas over and over in people's heads, like this would have to be a really long campaign. Go back to the note earlier about it's easy just to pay somebody to do most of these things. In order for
and
that
also,
to happen.
don't be that person that does this long. Like maybe you think about that something's wrong with you.
Yeah. If you're
like,
hearing,
you know,
if you're hearing.
if you need,
Should I be giving a PSA? Maybe I'm not the one to give this warning. Maybe someone that seems more sane in our group should give this warning.
Yeah, if you feel the need to mind control people, there might be a bridge too far that you've crossed. That's a...
This would have been a good moment to like bring up an animated version of the logo and have the logo like give that PSA.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll do, I'll do it after
when we go
take.
into time machines, we'll get back to that. Voice to skull technology does exist. It's probably not as good as those folks fear. But like, listen to everything I said in this already. Like, you probably have better ways of influencing people to do things than beaming microwaves into their brain. Like, this was the stuff that was, this was 1970s stuff. You know, look at Star Trek, okay? They didn't even think of the communicator having a picture on it. Like, it was a walkie-talkie. So it's like, the ideas of what's emerged with technology is beyond what was thought of in a lot of ways then, and behind what was thought of in a lot of ways then. I'll point you to Back to the Future, back to the time machine reference. This kind of idea, though, of influence campaigns that are based on preferences that you exhibit by, I don't know, hypothetically speaking, tapping or clicking on things or watching things or downloading things, or we're all much more influenceable now than our counterparts in the 70s. Mind control technology or not, in you know, trademark, you know, registered, I don't know, whatever. We're more influenceable now because we've filled out these, anyone who grew up in the 80s might remember slam books. And filling out all your preferences. You got a question at the top of the page. It's like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite animal? Because that's about where it was with these things we got. And you just go through and you fill them all out. And, you know, people do that now. You know, fill out all these things and find out which Harry Potter house you belong in, or what I don't know. I'm without real pop culture.
Does that sound like a good place to
give it some
ranking? Yeah, give us some.
Before we do that, I actually have a fun thought. So,
sure.
If you wanted to alter, if you wanted to mind control a single person, okay, we've decided, you know, essentially that, you know, throw money at the problem. You know, that's probably the best way, the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what if you wanted to mind control like at a massive scale, how would you do that? What would be the best way to the best way to do that, as opposed to like throwing a bunch of money at it? What would you do? Is it already being done?
I was just
Yeah.
saying, yeah. I mean, I like it depends your outcome. Like, what do you want to happen? Do you want like, you know, um, I would say like, depending how crazy you want to make things, you find pre-existing cultural like flashpoints, and you use, I don't know, like massive social media campaigns to push on them. I might be looking at you, Meta, you know, and what they to have done in other countries, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
and you can cause a lot of bad things to happen, you know, in order to just, when your end goal really seems to be sell advertising space to companies. It's like, but your inadvertent outcome is cause severe cultural harm and damage, you know, like, you know, but I think that would be like more of the thing that I would think of as mind control. It's just like, if there's a pre-existing, I mean, that's why we have, you know, like hot, you know, like wedge issues and things like that, you know, because they're easy to like, it's easy to us v them things. And then once that's there, you just push that a little bit more and harder. And then I guess like, but depends if that's in line with like your what your outcome is, you know, because we know like mass hysteria exists. We know these things like happen. Like we know like these are phenomenons that occur. Like, so it's like these things happen. So I think like as far as a group, but if like if your goal is just like, I don't know, like I guess I don't know, some kind of weird cultural compliance, you're gonna then depending how big the culture is, it's gonna it's gonna be really hard to just, I think, just have a net, you know, because it's like, because I think the best mind control on a large scale is disruptive, you know, and not compliant in the same way. I don't know.
Yeah. Religion. Yeah. If you think about old technology and getting people in on things, because actually like a lot of the stuff that we would talk about, like propaganda and stuff, they're talking about in Plato's Republic about making stories that encourage people to be a certain way, to grow up with certain virtues so that they're better members in your society.
But see, again, that only works for so long, and it often works better when you have another religion that's against you. Like,
Yeah,
you
well,
know?
actually, the us versus them thing is huge. It is huge. And there is, I don't know of a better way to influence a person's behavior than by leveraging their identity, who they think of themselves as being. That's at the core of cognitive dissonance. It's being consistent with the person they act as, but it's also about sometimes you have to change your identity, or rather, if you change your identity, it's one of the best ways to change your behavior. Those that want to look into that more, check out Atomic Habits by James Clear and all of his stuff on. I'm sorry, I'm getting blown up by my stupid government surveillance device. Apparently, people are sending pictures from another continent right now, and they have to let me know about it. See what I mean? I don't even pay attention to these things, and I can't focus. All right. What was I saying?
Links on the books will be in the description on the website. We'll put them out for you.
Help yourselves, people. James
Yeah.
Clear, Atomic Habits, Identity. It will change your life.
Bob, but let's stick with you. Start the rating system.
3 rutabagas, three monsters. I don't think it. Well, I think it's more scary that everybody else is walking. All right, here's my deal. Here's my take on it. Do I think mind control is real? It depends. It depends what you mean by mind and control. But I think actually, yeah, there is. We are far more influenced than we realize. And a lot of the decisions we don't make them for the reasons we think we are. But I'm not sure if that qualifies as mind control in the way most people think about it. So I do think it exists. And I think I do think it has a pretty heavy influence. I think advertisers have gotten really good at pulling our strings, and so have people that depend on those advertisers. And so we've gotten really good at it, and dangerously good at it, and probably will get even more dangerously good at it with the advent of more advanced AI and peripherals. So, am I scared of it? I'm more scared of the people that are trying to get them to do certain things when they're out, when they are. If they're trying to get them to buy stuff, I'm less scared of that than of trying to get them to, I don't know, overthrow a Guatemalan government. I'm referring to Ed Bernays right now, throwing back to the propaganda thing, a little Easter egg for those who know who Ed Bernays is. So influence campaigns have been used to overthrow governments, you know, and so that's scary. It's scary when you get people to act against their best interest. I think that's scary. I'm not really scared of somebody controlling my mind from afar using technology. I think my level of paranoia around it probably acts as a little bit of a buffer. But I know I'm not beyond influence campaigns either, for sure. So yeah, I'm gonna give it. I think I'm gonna give it 3 monsters. It definitely has potential to be really bad. Give it time. Next.
Just a side note, just something about advertising identity, things like that. There might be something else too that's not just like those things. I might be more like identity driven than just manipulative. Like you can make the association, like, you know, like you were talking about advertiser for getting orange juice popular as a breakfast, you know, kind of drink or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
You know, it's like that's the kind of idea. It's like, but that took lots of time and cultural context, and not just and the availability of cheap orange juice everywhere. You know, it's
Right.
like it has to be you know, it's like, but some advertisement is already like you already have to have a certain identity in there for it to even work. That's why I think like targeted advertisement, like, you know, works better, or like, you know, or pre-existing cultural things that you can push on buttons. Because like, for instance, like it's not going to be very effective if I'm getting advertisements to buy a McLaren. Like I cannot afford a McLaren. I'm not that I'm not, you know, an automobile type person. Really not, but it's like, but also like it's just not something I ever really desire. I've no thing. It's like, but like, if I'm a person that already wants something like that, and I want to show you the type of person I am through the things I buy, like, you know, a certain like, I guess like peacocking kind of idea, you know, like
Yeah.
I want to like show the world, this is the person I am. I'm a person who likes very high end over-engineered luxury sports cars that I want to drive on a road, you know, like particularly one with like a bunch of potholes, I guess, because I don't care about destroying it or something. You know, it's like whereas like, you know, it's like there's a, you know, it's kind of like I'm telling a story to the world about me through this thing, and their advertisement might have some influence on me, but I more likely would have to like it wouldn't have influence on like me, but unless I already had a pre-existing notion for something like that. So some advertisement just can't just be purely vibes. It already has to be set up for like, you know, a person like clearly we see lots of drug ads for sicknesses we don't have.
Right.
We're not going to be really swayed by, and I think that's why sometimes people go, why are there so many drug ads? They're so annoying, because it's like, because a lot of them are for specific illnesses, and that might be useful for people who have those illnesses or targeted to them, but not everybody has, you know, insert whatever problem this drug is going to solve. You know, it's not a universal thing. You already have to have something that's there for you to grasp onto to get to it. So it's like, so it does have that kind of weird like identity, you know, like you know, thing like, you know, for it to like work its way, you know, in, I guess. But yeah, but just like it's just a something I want to mention before we wrap up. But yeah, the mind control, yeah, I don't know. I think like obviously hypnosis and things exist. Like those types of things, they can work. I don't think it's like, I think obviously advertisement, but as far as classical, like get in your mind control, like, you know, turn you into something you don't want to do. Like I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical about that. I feel like a lot of that's like I don't think it's that scary. Like it's not as scary as like advertisement is, you know. So it's like I don't think it's like, I think it's just like there's other easier ways to do those, and it doesn't feel like, you know, I'm probably more scared of the boogeyman than of. I don't think I'm going to become a Manchurian Candidate or like a secret ninja, or, you know, like you know, those things don't really frighten me. So I feel like as far as like the concept is interesting, but it's not really that scary because I just think you have to be like, it's like it's just general stuff that's happening all the time, groupthink and things like that. So I'll give it like one monster, there's yeah.
If you want to become a ninja, though, and are interested in mind control, I would recommend Ninja Mind Control Secrets by Ashita Kim. Definitely a
That'll take
real
you back.
ninja.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's interesting hearing both your takes on this. So with our conversation, I'm going to redefine mind control as anything you doing something that either you are not aware that you've do it. That take two. I'm going to define mind control as a person doing something that they either don't want to do or they have no memory doing. And for me, I think that is incredibly terrifying. For my story at the very beginning, just like doing something, even though it was like harmless, but having no recollection of it. And then likewise, here, different drugs that can inhibit your ability to create memories and stuff like that. It's just terrifying to me. Obviously real on some level. I think you pair propaganda with this, I think it becomes, just awful. And I'm going to give this like 4.5 monsters. I think, the possibilities there on a single layer, on a single level rather, it's going to be simpler. Like we said, pay someone to do something. But I feel like, you can get anyone to do anything with enough money, and it could be blackmail, it could be extortion, group of people, same thing. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I think it'd be terrifying. So while I don't necessarily believe it, the way that we described it, with the swirling black and white spiral or something like that. Yeah, I would definitely not agree in that being a real thing. But as far as what could be done on the most simplest terms of mind control, it's terrifying. So yeah, 4.5 monsters.
You guys going to become secret ninjas? Would you be?
Well, I can't. How would I know? Well, that's the thing.
How do you know how much of a ninja you already are?
Yeah, you may already be a secret ninja.
So
that's mine. That's the book I'm reading.
Earlier we were talking about mass hysteria and what was the other term? Groupthink. Made me think of this. A nice little follow-up would be the Mothman, because that involves some really, really good tie-ins.
Man.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and also like Lady of Fatima.
Yes.
I mean, they're like some weird or like mass UFO sightings. People, keep your minds. Remember to be at choice. Give yourself good advice. And if you get in charge of mind control stuff, use it for good.